All right, hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are really going to kind of wrap up our discussion of the paper process. Next week when we meet, which will be our last class meeting, I believe. I believe I said this last week, we'll have an opportunity for you guys to present for some little bonus points. I don't know how much there will be. It'll be meaningful, but not, a full grade's worth, probably like 20 or 30 bonus points I'm picking. So a significant number. And that presentation is best done as a PowerPoint where you, and I apologize, I haven't done this in the past for this class, so I don't have any examples on here of exactly like what you guys have done relative for this, but what I would imagine would be kind of a PowerPoint slide by slide on the articles that you reviewed, giving us a review of those articles with a focus on their significance to your overall topic. So, introduce your problem, kind of think about that educational theory, introduce your problem, go through the different topics related to your problem and the articles that support them, or support the different components of what you've been discussing, ending with your conclusion and what you want to try and test for or measure, and then a like 3 to 5-ish, since it's very hypothetical, probably a little bit longer, maybe 5 or 6 different slides on your method section. And if you want to have a wrap up kind of faux discussion on what you expect to see, what you expect to see based on what you have read, that would be fine. It's not necessary, but it gives me an idea if you are interpreting the data and interpreting what you are reading in somewhat of an accurate way. And I think that last piece, even though it's not a requirement for this course, is really important, because it would show, at least in some cases, whether or not you are allowing your thought process to be driven by what the current research says. Your analysis, again, should be based on where the data lead you, not necessarily where you want the data to go. It's very easy to say, well, I think that this is going to happen because that seems logical to me, whether or not the prior supporting research actually support that outcome. So anyway, come up with what you come up with. If you'd like to present, I'll send an email out to everyone just so I can budget time. But if you'd like to present, have that ready, and send me an email of whether or not you think you will be doing that. All right. Okay, before we finish off the conversation about the method section, focusing on some of the other components of the method section now that we've moved out of design, are there any questions from either you, Claire, or Sid?
I had a question about what you expected in the abstract section for the project.
So abstracts are interesting. They're the best model for abstracts that you have are abstracts of the published articles that you are reading, minus the results that are provided in that abstract. But the way that they model that or that they write those abstracts, that's what I'm looking for. Abstracts are very, they're not an exact formula, but they are formulaic in nature. It is a brief summary of what you are doing, who you are doing it with, what your variables were, and in full abstract what your outcomes were. All right. So an abstract has APA limitations on the number of words, and then there are actually, depending on the journal article that you submit to or the journal that you submit to, there would be maybe some additional requirements in there. But use the abstracts of the articles that you are reading as a model. All right. I know that's not a great answer in terms of like what I expect, but if you follow that, you will get your full points. Does that make sense, Claire?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good. And that's something that, there's no one right way to do it. There are lots of right ways to do it. There are actually very few wrong ways to do that, which is why I'm not so concerned about it. That's more about the practice or the opportunity to practice that as an exercise versus like a specific thing that I'm looking for. So I'll be able to give you feedback on there, but look, as long as it's in and close, you'll be in good shape. All right. Sid, any questions from you, or are you good?
I was wondering the same thing about the abstract.
Oh, great. Awesome. Okay. Does that answer your question then, or do you feel comfortable about that?
Definitely.
All right, awesome.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so as we move out of the methods section, or out of the design section of the methods, the kind of the two components that are really left to talk about. I feel like we've gone over participants in a number of ways. We talked about design, talking about the variables now, and talking about the procedure and how those are written and what those are looking like. So looking at those two things as two separate but related sections, what you want to be thinking of are, how do I describe what the variables are, as opposed to how I do the variables. And then the procedure section is, how do I actually go about getting the information for those variables? All right. When you read, especially single subject design, where there's like an individual procedure for each thing, it can be very, I don't want to say tempting, but it almost flows into that, the variables, the measurement component, how you collect the data collection, and the procedure become somewhat redundant upon each other, right? Where I'm describing what my independent and dependent variable are, and then I'm saying how I collect data on the independent and the dependent variable. And then I'm describing how I'm implementing interventions that are the dependent and independent variable. And it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over and over. But that's really not, you want to try and avoid that process. You want to avoid being so redundant in your paper. You're actually looking at conveying very specific information in each of those. So if you look at the definition of variables, where you're describing the independent and the dependent variable, you are trying to demonstrate or trying to show how you are, for the dependent variable in particular, how you are going to look at a particular variable of interest specifically. So not what you're going to do to collect it, but like let's say your dependent variable is test outcomes. All right, so you have pre-test scores and post-test scores. You want to be able to define where those scores are coming from, how they are or are not related to your conceptual dependent variable. And that's really it. So let's say we are going to be doing getting a measure of reading fluency, and we are going to be using beginning of year and end of year DIBELS scores. All right. So what I would want to do in that situation is say that we're using DIBELS scores for our participant pool. DIBELS is or is not administered on an annual basis. That can go in that that section, and we can actually cite where, if we have not already, where DIBELS is shown to be a valid measure of reading fluency in that area. So we are able to show in one section what the measure is going to be. The fact that DIBELS is given at the beginning and the end of the year for our purposes would go together. You may or may not end up with a separate data collection section. That would be a little bit unnecessary here, but if you do end up with a separate data collection section, then the fact that DIBELS is given pre and post test naturally in the beginning beginning and end of this year in your district, it could go in there, but for our purposes, it could go under the variables. And then the relevance of the test that you are giving to the overall question. All right. And the reason that is important is not so much in something like DIBELS, but rather in areas where you are providing a dependent measure that is representative of the behavior as a whole. All right. What do I mean by that? So let's say I am measuring, I don't know, I want to use the dependent variables that are most familiar to me, but those are probably least familiar to you. Let's say I'm measuring, here we go, the number of interactions that a child has with peers. All right. I have some social intervention that I'm using. That's what I want to look at. I want to get a measure of social interaction with peers. There's no way, unless I watch a child every day for 3 or 4 or 5 days and really notate the exact number of interactions that occur, there's no real solid, valid, I don't want to say no valid way, but purely valid way to get those data. Rather, I'm going to be measuring something that represents those data, and then I'm going to be extrapolating that out to make conclusions. So maybe I watch my student for a period of time during recess, a period of time during academic work, and a period of time during structured instruction that allows for peer interaction. All right, so recess would be like the pure go play and how much do you interact. The academic time would be given this rule of don't really interact. Do you interact anyway? AKA, do you talk to your friends while working? And the third would be given academic tasks where you are allowed to interact. Do you interact, or to what degree do you interact? So this is a sample, would be a sample of social situations and where I can collect some amount of data on interactions. In the dependent variable section, I would not give the procedural or the methodological definition of the dependent variable. Rather, I want to be able to tie this variable to my theoretical variable. The dependent variable of time sampling of social interactions was based on the variables used in yada, yada, yada et al. Paper 2014. All right. So I take this opportunity to give my current variable some validity, some social credence, right? Where I can say, I'm not making this up. One of the, I haven't spoken about it too much in this class, but in other research classes, one of the things that I've been able to say is that when you're doing research, you can either use a validated dependent variable and change your independent variable, or a validated independent variable and change your dependent variable, but not both. You can use valid dependent and independent variable, but you can't use unvalidated both dependent and independent variables, if that makes sense. So in this situation, you may want to be showing that or in this section, you want to be showing that your dependent variable or your independent variable, which we'll get to in a sec, is based on the validated dependent variable that someone else used to measure whatever it is that you are looking at. All right. What you're trying to get at here is being able to show your audiences that you didn't make this up, that someone else was able to or has reviewed and said that, yes, this is an accurate or a reasonable or a reliable or valid measure of the behavior that you are saying that you are going to be looking at. All right. Maybe there is an amount of social interactions that is deemed valid. Maybe 2-minute time samples in each of those settings is not valid. However,
Claire, can you hear me?
Yeah, it says I'm the meeting host now.
Okay, I saw that. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just on my end.
Should we wait until, see if he can join back?
Yeah, probably so.
Or do you think we need to leave the meeting and rejoin so he can be the host or whatever?
Maybe so, because it still says it's recording.
Okay, so let's both leave and then join back.
All right, sounds good.